Hey everyone, welcome back. Um, in this video, we are going to be sculpting our high poly version of our trunk and then exporting that and also decimating and exporting a low poly so that we can bake our maps out. So let's get started. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is open up Zbrush. I have Zbrush here. I am working off of an older version of Zbrush, so I unfortunately have to do this really weird way of moving and scaling and stuff, and you guys will see that in a second. If you have a newer version of Zbrush, that's awesome. Um, that one actually has a regular widget, so I envy you. Anyways, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to import our base mesh that we made in 3ds Max. So let's find that. And I also wanted to just state that again, this is the first time I've really made any kind of process video tutorial, so I'm not really sure how this is gonna go. I'm only saying that because my my sculpting process, it's a lot of trial and error when I'm doing these plants and stuff. So I might have to go back and forth between a couple of things, and I hope that's okay with you guys. I am purposely not going to delete that stuff, because again, I think it's important that you guys see that we should try a bunch of things before we stumble upon the um, the solution to a lot of these problems. Because I don't really see a lot of tutorials that show that stuff, and there's probably a reason, but I'm gonna try and be different. I don't know, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Anyway, so here's my OBJ ponytail palm base. Cool. I'm gonna open that up. There we go. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to just drag that out, and you'll see that immediately we see our model here. So I'm going to hold shift so that it can be snapped to an axis there. You'll also notice that if I click and draw, I can't do anything else. And that's because I need to go in, actually not anymore. I need to draw this out, and then I need to press edit. And now we're actually not constrained to the ZBrush, its version of creating a new template for our project. So I also like to keep my document to where I can see my border here, and that's because sometimes I can get lost in space if I'm zoomed in all the way like this. So that's just personal preference, but the way to do that is you just go to this panel here and zoom in and out. So I'm just going to keep this like this, and that's fine for now. So I also should mention I am on a Wacom Cintiq tablet. It's pretty sweet. It's my first tablet that I've ever owned that has, that I'm actually drawing directly on my screen. So I don't think that should affect any of you guys, but I just thought I would mention that. Okay, so I am looking at this model right now, and I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to subdivide this guy. And the reason for that is if we try to sculpt on this, you'll see that not a lot's happening, and that's because we're only working with the polys that we originally made in 3ds Max. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my right panel. I'm going to go to geometry, and I'm going to hit divide a couple of times. Now you'll notice that the mesh is somewhat collapsing in on itself. If I press Control Z, you can see that, you know, this transition here between this trunk and this trunk, it actually gets smaller. And that's because, like I said in my last video, it's taking the average of these distances and then it's smoothing them out. And that is okay because I purposefully pulled these a little far into each other on, you know, on purpose so that we could account for that. So I'm gonna keep hitting divide and maybe one more time. And I think that's fine. I also should mention that my poly count isn't showing, and that has something to do with my Cintiq. So right now I'm at 119,491 active points, and you'll see that in your top panel. So I'm actually going to divide like maybe once or twice more. Yeah, that's cool. I'm still getting a little bit of choppiness here. Let me double check that. So yeah, 477. You know what? Let's do one more time. Let's go one more time. Subdivision. Let's divide that one more time. So I have a bunch of resolution now. Some of the character guys that I work with, they go into like millions and millions of polys, active points, and I don't think we need that for this. But I could understand why you would need it for a character because it's, you know, they're using those models for cinematics and stuff, and you got to make sure that you get all that detail. I think we're fine for now. You can see over here on this side that I actually subdivided 7 times, and it keeps track of this number, so I can actually go back if I wanted to. So I can take this slider and run it back, and it'll actually take me back to that number of subdivisions that I make. So just an FYI, in case you guys didn't know that, I'm gonna take that back up. Cool. So I think we're ready to start sculpting. Yes, I think we are. And actually, you know what? So I'm debating right now if I should Dynamesh or not. When we Dynamesh, it's going to get rid of these inside areas here. How you can see these faces, you know, collapsing on itself, and in turn that'll give us lower amount of polys, but it'll also cap this off. But we can get rid of that later. And I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to sculpt first, and then I will Dynamesh. And that's only because as we're sculpting, we can still keep our subdivisions. And this kind of goes back to our non-destructive workflow of, you know, keeping it kind of like how we did in Max, where we have this stack of modifiers. So that's how I think of this, is the subdivision level is a stack of modifiers, and for that purpose, I'm going to keep it there, and then when we're ready to make the final call and say, you know what, this sculpt is good, then we're going to Dynamesh it. There might be cases where we need to Dynamesh earlier than that, but we will do that once we get to that point. So cool. I'm just looking at our profiles again, trying to see what our first. I'm orbiting, and then when I hold shift, it will snap to front, right, left, top, whatever view. Okay, yeah, just refreshing my understanding of our profile. Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do, these trunks are actually not super complicated, and I have my reference here on my second screen. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start sculpting kind of larger shapes, and what I mean by that is areas where this trunk can start to you know, we can start breaking up this silhouette a little bit. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my, trying to decide which brush I want to use for this. I think I'm going to start with a clay tubes brush. And so I'm going to press B for brush, C for clay tubes, and then T for clay tubes. And I use this brush on rocks a lot, and you'll see why in a second. If I start to just, sculpt on it, you'll see that it automatically starts to break this thing up in a very rigid way. And I don't know if that's necessarily what we want yet, but I'm just going to experiment for a little bit and see what happens. If we don't want that rigidness, we can always do what's called a clay polish, and I'm just going to show you what that is really quick. So let's say we have something like that. If I go over here and I go to clay polish, I can maximum curvature. I can press clay polish, and you'll see that Zbrush it polishes off essentially our strokes. So if I press Control Z, that's what we had before, and this is what we have after clay polish right there. You can mess with these settings here, sharpness, maximum curvature. So usually what I end up doing is I do a combination of clay polish or just my smooth brush, and smooth is just holding shift. So holding shift, I'm going to change my stroke to freehand, and I'll just smooth it out like that. And that's how I approach my sculpts. Is, oops, let's go back to our subdivision. Is I will very, for lack of a better word, crudely block in my larger shapes, and then I will, after that, smooth it out and then apply our kind of micro noise on top of that. So I'm just gonna use clay tubes for now. Probably a bunch of other people would say that's dumb. You should use like the move tool, and yeah, you're, to each their own, but this is just how I do it. So with my clay tubes brush selected, I'm just gonna start blocking out my my bottom base here of this trunk. First thing I see are these two creases here. Actually, I want to keep that. I don't want to change that much, so I'm gonna hold Alt. If you don't hold Alt, it adds. If you hold Alt, it takes away, as you can see. I'm also going to change my intensity down a little bit. Let's try. Yeah, that's fine. So this is how I do most of my trees. Is I will start to kind of play with some carving effects, and automatically, I kind of get this, these areas where it breaks apart. It starts to break apart this pure roundness of this trunk, and that is fine. And I think this is gonna work. So what I did just now is I'm smoothing it out just to see how it's gonna look. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. That could look nice as for this type of tree. So another thing I forgot to mention, every ZBrush class and person that I've ever talked to, they hate this red wax material that's on here, and I can see why. You don't get too much definition of what's going on. What you can do if you want is you can change this to a different material. What I usually do is I usually go with matte cap gray or fast shader. Usually I lean towards matte cap gray. Let me try fast shader. Yeah, and you can always change the color of this material too, but I'm just going to go with matte cap gray. So tapping on that material, choosing matte cap gray, and it makes it active. Cool. And I think it's mainly because you get a little bit more shadow definition of what's going on in your model, that a lot of people like this. So I happen to agree, and I think I'm going to continue with that. So let's keep going with this. Let's just start to get our kind of our breakup here. So I'm gonna just kind of choose some areas where I'm thinking that that these creases would look good to go into our tree. I might want to have a crease that actually kind of comes out a little bit more. So, you know, when I hold shift, it'll turn blue. So hopefully I'm not moving too fast for you guys. Again, like I said, a lot of this ZBrush stuff, at least for me, is experimentation. There's probably a lot of other artists that uh, use ZBrush in a different way, but this is how I've been using ZBrush, and it seems to work for me. So ZBrush is such a complicated tool. My technical director was explaining to me, and I probably should look this up and not feed you information that I just heard, but the Pixelogic, or the ZBrush program, actually started off in the film industry, and it sort of explains why the UI is so different than traditional 3D programs. So pretty cool. I love seeing other industries impact, you know, industries that are not theirs. I come from architecture, so I kind of naturally gravitated towards environment art because I like designing these spaces. And then I got into to trees and stuff after I took Jeremy's class, and he works at Naughty Dog. I don't know if he presently works there, but he did when I took his class, and that's called Plants and Vegetation for Games. So as you can see here, I'm sort of, I'm breaking this up already, and you can see what I mean by quote unquote breakup. I'm giving us just a tad bit of definition to our base model, and this is what I'm going to be doing for essentially the rest of this model here. And I like how, I'm looking at my reference. Some of these trees, they kind of weave in and out when it comes towards the base and where it meets the soil. So I am doing my best to capture that in this asset, and I don't think it's looking too bad. So again, there's like a billion different tools in ZBrush that you guys can use. This one I have found works the best for me, clay tubes, and then I just smooth it over. So, I used to feel super self-conscious about when I would use a certain tool over another, and I'm just learning that as long as we get to that end result, it doesn't really matter how we do it, right? Provided that it doesn't take us 10 years extra than the traditional way, quote unquote. So as I'm doing this, I'm being mindful of these initial creases, because like I said, I want to preserve that. I don't want to just erase over it and and because I think that would look very unnatural to how we originally modeled this asset. So um, the way as I'm doing this, I'm just thinking, one way that we can do that is we can actually hold Alt and just kind of carve away, because both of these trunks meet together, and they meet in a what's that word that I'm looking for? A not an indent, but the opposite, a depression, I guess, in its surface. So I always try to find areas that, this natural seam, and then I just essentially I like to exaggerate it. And in the same, kind of in the same vein, that's what I'm doing over here, just on this what used to be really smooth surface. Is I'm just starting to make strokes, and then I'm exaggerating them, right? I'm not I'm not just randomly throwing stuff at this thing to see what works. Well, I guess that's debatable. But, when I do decide to make a stroke, I'm going to exaggerate that. So what I mean is, naturally I've already created this sort of ripple in the trunk, and I'm going to build off of it. Just keep adding to it. See how that looks, smooth it out, and then I'm like, yeah, that's not bad. I'm looking for areas where I can keep adding layers and layers of definition onto this asset. So, and sometimes I will run into areas where I'm like, okay, yeah, that's too much definition. And what I do is I'll just dial it back. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. I'm just gonna kind of keep at it here, being mindful of this crease that we naturally created in Max. Cool. Areas where I think maybe I went a little too overboard, I'll usually just see if I can go over it multiple times with the smooth. Usually that works. Sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't work, I might go to another brush, like the Move brush, and see how we can do that. So, I had a feeling that this was going to happen. So, as you can see, we have this little piece of geometry here that's poking through our mesh, and that's coming from this element here. And you can see if I rotate underneath, you'll see that I'm pulling it outwards, and it's clipping through this mesh. So I'm just thinking now, maybe now we should Dynamesh, because again, the reason why I did not Dynamesh up until this point is I wanted to check how our subdivisions were going. If we needed to go back in subdivisions, we still have that option. What I'm going to do is I'm going to Dynamesh. So I'm going to delete lower, and this is essentially the point of no return. I mean, obviously we have our undo history, but I like to think that let's make decisions. Let's I like how this little area is turning out, and I think that it's okay. Let's just do it. I'm gonna delete this lower, and essentially now we've lost our subdivisions. Obviously, I'm keeping track of my undo history, so it's not so permanent. Let's go down to, where is he at? Geometry, and then Dynamesh. There you are. So under the geometry panel here. I'm going to go down to Dynamesh. I'm going to bump this resolution up quite high because I want to somewhat match the number of active points that I have right now, which is to be approximate 1.909 million. Cool. So let's bump that up to 2048. And then I'm gonna hit Dynamesh. And Zbrush is gonna do its magic. And it looks like I probably should have saved because Zbrush can be a little finicky. Okay, yeah, so you'll see at the top, our top progress bar here, it says projection in progress. So Zbrush is doing its thing. And at some point, my computer is warning me high CPU usage is detected and I may experience performance issues. Maybe we shouldn't have gone so high. At some point it'll end. I might cut this. I don't know. Hopefully this is gonna, there we go. We can use that time to catch up. So, after that Dynamesh, we end up with 2.132 million. And that's okay. That's fine. You'll see that we got those extra polys because Dynamesh in Zbrush caps the any holes you have, so it capped this off, but it also merged our meshes. So if I go back to that area that I was talking about earlier, these polys got merged. If I zoom in really far, and I'm holding Shift and pressing F to turn on wireframe, these polys all got merged with the other poly element. And what we can do now is we can just go over with our handy dandy smooth brush and we can smooth that out. So Dynamesh is great. In Jeremy's class, he would constantly be Dynameshing back and forth between his sculpts. I highly encourage that. And the reason why he does that is if you're, drawing something and okay, that's probably too much, obviously. So if I'm drawing something and I'm like pulling this out a really long way, you'll see that as the geometry gets pulled outward and outward, it starts to lose resolution, like between this transition and this transition. If I Dynamesh it Zbrush projects the new topology onto this model as closely as possible, depending on our resolution. So I highly recommend, if you guys run into issues like that where you're running out of resolution, Dynamesh. And the way you can do that is hold Control and then drag. I'm not going to do that right now because that took forever. But what I am going to do is I'm going to save what we have so far, because it would be silly to lose all of our work. And you guys get to take a peek into my naming structure. I'm going to call this 01 ponytail palm trunk, and then I'll just try to call this HP for high poly. And if you guys hear, I've got a golden ticket in the background. My wife and my daughter are watching Willy Wonka, so that's fun. Okay, got that saved. Right, so let's continue with this. Let's just keep adding shapes, basic shapes. I haven't decided yet if this one might be too much. I don't know. Let's work with it. Stand by your work, right? No, I'm kidding. But I remember when I was in school, one of my professors would always say, "Stand by your work." erasers, or erasers, or I don't remember what he said, but he would always just bag on erasers because the only way you're ever going to learn or get better is if you acknowledge things that you did incorrectly or whatever. So that always kind of stuck with me. I'm like, well, I created this problem. How am I going to fix it? Without an eraser. It might not be relevant to the game industry, but in architecture it certainly is, because you have to hand draft in your first couple years of school, and that's fun. And as we know, eraser marks are gross and smudgy, so he's just saying work with it, make it work. Okay. So yeah, I am again going back to this methodology of exaggerating things and just building my building up my shapes, right? So you can see here, I went up and then I kind of curved back around to naturally follow the trunk in the way that it's growing. And as per usual, I'm going to go back over with a smooth on it. I'm starting to think that I might have added too much resolution with that Dynamesh, because now Zbrush is preserving quite a lot of info when I'm doing my brush strokes. And by quite a lot of info, I just mean, it's not smoothing as it used to before I Dynameshed, but that's okay. That's okay. Don't panic. So keep on keeping on. Holding shift, smoothing this stuff out. Cool. I'm not liking the lumpiness of this. What I might do is I might see if I can smooth as much as possible. That's okay. That shouldn't be an issue. And if it is, then we will fix it. Here's another area that I was talking about before, where before we Dynameshed, our other mesh element got intersected with this mesh element. So I just went ahead and I smoothed that out. Cool. And this is not too bad. Yeah. I'm okay. I'm not sorry. I am liking this. And yeah, so as you can see, compared to our other two, we've gone in now and we've created some definition for our base. I would even say we do the same. I originally, when I started looking at this tree, most of the I don't know what you would call them, I guess trunk sprouts, besides the base of the trunk, the actual trunk itself, most of them are fairly smooth, and that could probably be reflected with just a texture. Obviously we want some normal information. So I was considering just leaving this smooth. I think after we've done this, we kind of need to go over it. But let's do these other two first, and then let's see how it ends up. I'm actually going to turn this intensity down as well, because I think after, like I said before, our Dynamesh was a little too high, and it's retaining a lot of information. And it's, again, sculpting is, I've found at least, is just finding a nice balance between I'm going to call it informed experimentation. So things that you have a hunch are going to work, and trying them, and if they work, great, and if they don't, then we got to find another solution. I'm trying to see how I want to handle this edge here. I think what I'm going to do is create kind of a nice little stroke that way, and then I might carve in this way. Carve in, and then just kind of make that transition here. So all I'm doing is I'm just going back and forth between holding Alt for carving in and then just regular adding geo. So it seems to be working. You know, we're getting some of that breakup that we want, and that's good. So I'm just gonna, start to, and obviously I'm going back and I'm looking at my reference. I purposefully choose to exaggerate some areas, and that's just because when it comes to baking out our mesh maps, I want to be able to show that we have studied this plant and we've we have thought about it as an overall asset, and we didn't just slap on a just some random tree bark texture, you know. We've given this asset meaning, form, and shape, and that's good. Some game companies might think otherwise. They might just want to, and that's another thing that I'm just thinking of, is it really depends on the studio you're working with, because some studios they need assets that are highly repeatable, and other studios need hero assets, and obviously all studios need both of those things, but I'm just talking about one leans towards the other more heavily. If you're making a giant open world game, obviously you're going to use a lot of repeatable assets, but if you're making a first person shooter and you're going to be on a really close to this asset, then we need to be able to know that, because those things matter. So I'm rambling. Apologize. Cool. Okay. This one is a little bit more exaggerated than I thought it was going to be. So I'm just going over with a smooth, and it may not look like it's doing anything, but it is, just really slowly. I'm gonna, and if you guys are first time ZBrush users, I would highly recommend getting familiar just with its interface, and just getting into a flow of learning the buttons. Right, I'm using a pen, so I'm sculpting with this. It's much easier in my opinion. I've sculpted with a mouse before, and once I used a pen, I never went back. So And I'm only saying that now because I figured that you'd probably be wondering how I keep pulling up this menu and changing my brush size. On the Wacom pens, there's a little button on the side that gives you pretty easy default access to like a lot of the major components that you're going to be working with. Mine, typically all I work with is brush draw size and focal shift. Obviously intensity, and then you got your color gradients on the side here. And I apologize if you guys are watching this and you're just like, man, just shut up and get on with the thing. But I think it's important to create a dialogue as well. So I'm actually going to go in and smooth out this transition of this, where you can see that the Dynamesh merged both of the meshes that are intersecting, and it kind of gives us a nice transition as opposed to something really bumpy and noisy. And I do this when it's just something that I know I have to do at some point. So when I'm thinking, I will kind of move my focus to doing stuff that I know I need to do. I also forgot to mention that you'll see our trunk transition did a decent job with our support loops, and it didn't smooth it out as much as I wanted it to, but we can always just go in with our smooth brush and just smooth that transition out. Sorry, off topic, but I kept talking about it in the last video. I thought I should bring it up and make sure that you guys know I'm not just throwing out random stuff when I'm doing it. So, okay. Let's continue. Sorry, getting all turned around up in here. Okay, let's continue giving some shape and form to our tree. I think this is going to look really good. The other thing too is it's not a difficult asset to make. But hopefully you guys can gain something from this, like the main principles here again are just blocking in your main shapes, making decisions, and just going with it, obviously with your reference in mind. And then towards the end, that's when we get like the crazy micro detail. I'm not liking how bumpy this is turning out. I'm thinking that we probably shouldn't have Dynameshed as early as we did, and that makes me sad, but it happens. And if I was at work, I would probably go back and do all of my primary sculpting first, and then I would Dynamesh. But I also have a couple of things that I want to try before and I'm not going to, but I would say before I quote unquote abandon this method, because it's really all about breaking breaking things up, and the only reason why I'm saying that I don't like it is just because it looks a little too bumpy, but you also have to keep in mind that we're going to be putting in micro detail on top of this, so it could be a good thing. It could be a good thing that it looks slightly noisy. So let's finish this guy up. And I'm just sort of following these natural creases that I'm creating here, and then I'm just smoothing them out, and that's been a lot of this, obviously. So again, for any of you guys that are using Zbrush for the first time, this would actually be a really good asset to practice with, because using this method of just building up and then smoothing, it'll get you used to Zbrush's interface and orbiting around, looking at your asset as a whole, and not being constantly zoomed in this far all the time. You know, I'm sort of zooming out and I'm like, okay, yeah, that reads pretty well. Not bad. I'm looking at this side. Yeah, that one's cool because I got all these little rivets in there. Same thing here. I could even, if I wanted to, exaggerate this side even more, and maybe this crease, it kind of like comes up like that, and then it merges with this one. And I'm basing all of this off of my reference again. And you start to develop an eye for this when you've been doing it for a while. Ugh, I don't like that. I'll just smooth that out. You start to develop an eye for this stuff. Yeah, you know what? I'm actually gonna take that back. But again, I'm exaggerating things, and one thing that I'm gonna show you guys that might come in handy are morph targets. And I will show you what that is in a second here, once I get to a point where I'm happy with this guy. Just trying to smooth him out. That's okay. It's fine. Cool. So morph targets. So if I come down here and I go to morph target, there's only one button that's active, and that's store morph target. I will do this a lot if I'm creating stylized assets, not so much realistic, but you should probably do this with all assets. So what a morph target is it essentially preserves your strokes, and you can go back and change its width, its height, its distance, things like that. So let me just show you. Let's say I make a big stroke there. I'm like, okay, sure. Oops, I'm sorry. Let's say I hit store morph target first, and then I make a big stroke here. What I can do is I can go back, and I can actually, by having this slider active, I can dial it down a little bit, you know, like, okay, yeah, that looks better as opposed to this. I can also increase its intensity, and that's really cool. Another way that we can approach this, I'm actually just gonna Control Z and delete this morph target. Another way we can approach building out these creases, I'm just going to show you. I'm not going to do it for this asset, but I'm going to go to BDS, and that gets us our damn standard brush. I'm going to change my stroke to freehand, and you can see that the damn standard has, with this alpha, a concentrated middle point, and then it blurs out around all sides. And if I wanted to, I could hold Alt and draw the inverse of that, and I can end up with something like that. It looks speckly and kind of gross, so one way I can have it not do that would be to go up here to stroke and go to lazy mouse and then bring that step down. That's what that dotted point is, down a really low number, and then bump up your smooth and your radius. And then what I can do now is hold it, and now we get a nice straighter line here. And with the morph target, what I can do is I can store it again, make the same stroke here, and then just say, okay, I don't want it that crazy, I just want it like that. So you can see already that this is one way that we could get this effect, right? I do this a lot for stylized assets, where the style is it has a lot of these clean lines, and so that's actually, yeah, sorry, that's my method for for certain areas. I'm not going to do it here just because I am pretty comfortable with how this is coming out and I want my look to be consistent. So I'm just going to keep on with my clay tubes. Just keep on keeping on. I don't like that at all. I'm going to go back here. Probably a better solution to this area would be if I brought this down a little bit and then merged it like that, and then just sort of build that up and start to smooth it back out. Right there. Yeah, sure. Why not? Anyways, so let's keep focusing on these larger shapes, and then we'll move on to those micro details, those cracks in the base that I was telling you about in our research phase. So let's build something out like this. Yeah, cool. I'm breaking that up. I'm just looking at it from the top down so that it's not so smooth around like that. Then I'll just follow this up like that, and then yeah, and you can see that the clay tubes method would work really well if you're making stuff like rocks, and essentially you would do the same thing, but you just wouldn't smooth it, you know, unless you have a really smooth rock, obviously. So you can see here that we've now created this natural crease in between like that. I'm going to pull this out a little bit more like that. Yeah. Let's continue. Maybe it's time we carved in a little bit. And then we taper this inward like that, and then holding Alt, just carving away a little bit. My Cintiq is pressure sensitive, so if I just lift up on how hard I'm pressing the pen to the tablet, it should recognize that. And that's really helpful. Keep on sort of doing that. Okay. These three pieces here, they kind of merge into one, so I want to make sure that we have an even surface amount that it reaches out to. This one we probably shouldn't have gone out so far. Either that or we just build this up a little bit more as it dies into this. So that's okay. You know what I'm going to do? And you guys should be doing this every 5 seconds is saving. I'm actually sort of surprised that Zbrush hasn't crashed yet because I have notoriously bad luck. And I have had instances where I have pretty much a full sculpt and then Zbrush decides, oh, I'm going to make you pay for not saving. And then we all have a nice cry. We drink some whiskey and then we move on. So you can see that just following these along, I'm sort of mimicking the micro detail cracks that this tree has with that kind of water pattern that we see in the trunk's base, and I think it's producing a pretty cool result. I think this is going to work really well for us. So yeah, it's kind of nice when you get into this groove, you just start to sculpt and you it's nice and therapeutic, at least it is for me. And you know, now we've created this like little indentation here. I'm gonna exaggerate that because it looks good. Cool. So speaking of getting into a groove, it's good to get into a groove, obviously, because that's how stuff gets done, but you also don't want to lose sight of how your asset is working as a whole. So that's why I'm constantly zooming in and out and seeing how this stuff is working with the language of this. And so far I think it's okay. There's this part that I sort of crossed over here and blended with this shape. That's actually the only time that I'm seeing it here. But that's okay, because I can just build this back up. You know, I'm just zooming in and out, kind of doing a self-critique of this, of my sculpt and seeing how this would be looking. The game that I'm making this for, it is a first-person game, and I do need to be mindful of things like this, so this isn't necessarily a hero asset. I think this is more of a set piece. But who's to say that this couldn't become a hero asset? So this one might have been a little bit too much, but that's okay. I like to make these crossover veins, I guess you could call them, and they kind of just they naturally find their way to die into the trunk. So I'm listening to Willy Wonka in the background, just remembering how awesome Gene Wilder is, or was, I guess. So hopefully this is making sense to you guys. In my mind, it's pretty straightforward, but I've watched a ton of tutorials where they do the same exact thing, and I'm like, why the heck did they do this? I don't understand. I might, when I post this up for you guys, I might have a thing where if you do have questions, I might create like a Discord or some kind of message board or something, and if you guys have questions, maybe we could get that going if you're interested. I don't know. Just let me know. Let me know. So I'm gonna start carve a little bit, and then maybe that carve meets back up here to the natural crease, and then I follow this guy all the way down, and he just dies in like right there. And I smooth all this out. I don't know how I'm feeling about that. I might just cut it off right there. Something like that. Yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Just make sure that oops. And now I think I might try to incorporate some areas where this crease is a little less pronounced. Obviously here it's very pronounced, and as I'm looking at my reference images, there are definitely some parts where the crease where two of these trees meet up is very pronounced, but there's also areas where it's not so much. And I think it would be cool if we had instances of both of those situations. So I might kind of go in here and maybe dig out this crease a little bit, or I guess build up would be a better term, but just make it to where it's not so noticeable on this side, and then we still have this one over here where it's very noticeable. So yeah, this happens a lot when I'm making my assets. Is I try to stick with my block out as much as I can, but at the end of the day, it's just a block out, you know, and we can still build off of things that we deem necessary to build off of. So, yeah, and I think that's good. Nice pronounced crease here, and then maybe a little bit less over here, so that we really get a sense of connection between these guys. Cool. All right. So for the base, I think that's, for now at least, I think that's good. That's a good start. I'm going to now decide what I want to do with these top trunks here. I think I might just make really, really broad strokes. Oops. And then soften them out, because these, these trunks are actually quite smooth, as I said before. And that's fine, or that's good. I mean, I just want to, I suppose, mimic what I did on the trunk base just a little bit. This might be a good area to use our morph targets, because we might draw something that's a little too intense and we want to be slightly subtle for this part at least. And I'm just looking at this and I think that'll work. Just as long as we can have a nice smooth transition from this stuff up to the, up the trunk. So, it really, we're only going to be doing maybe a couple of strokes and then just smoothing them out, just building out our base shapes. Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's fine. It's fine for that. Again, I'm just looking at my reference and I'm deciding that I have a nice view of one of these trunks up close, and this bottom base here is very rough in terms of cracks and stuff, and these taller areas where it finally goes up to the canopy is fairly smooth. So I'm not going to overcomplicate things as much as I like to do that. So yeah, just really, really simple strokes and smoothing stuff out. And I think that's going to be just fine. Just fine, you guys. Another thing that I like to do is I like to look at other games while I'm playing them and just sort of study how they do their foliage. Like right now I'm playing Days Gone. It's a really cool game and it has a lot of foliage. But you'll start to see how, obviously that game is an open world game and there are certain budget constraints, and you need to be able to take that into consideration when you're making trees and plants and stuff. So in certain areas the tree cards are quite noticeable, but probably a casual player wouldn't notice stuff like that. But that's just the stuff I like to pay attention to. I like trees and I like plants, and I think it adds a lot to an environment. Really looking forward to The Last of Us Part 2, because I know that game is going to have a quadrillion amount of trees and plants, and the guys over at Naughty Dog make such awesome foliage. And they have like just such a crazy amount of detail that they pay attention to. And that's pretty cool. So, yeah. So, at the end of this, we kind of get a result. A result that looks pretty good. Not bad. Okay. First thing, I'm gonna save. I like like how this is turning out. I like our main shapes, and I like how it's working together with the taller parts of the trunk. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get some of those cracks into here, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a very simple height map, and we're going to use it to project onto our model. So, sorry, I'm paranoid now. Okay, we're gonna do this with Substance Designer. There's a million ways you guys can do this. I find this way to be the easiest. I realize that a lot of other people will do this a different way. They'll just sort of, and we're gonna do essentially the same thing, but we're just going to sculpt in a different way. And I was gonna say a lot of where did my Substance Designer go? Sorry. Okay, here we go. So, gosh dang it. I'm trying to get this onto my Cintiq screen, and there we go. Okay. This is going to be very, very simple. Let's make a new substance. Holy cow. Okay. Let's make a new substance, ... Why? What? Okay, I can't see where it's telling me. What is happening? I'm sorry, guys. Let me try this again. Substance Designer is being very silly right now, and I think that's because I'm using it on my Cintiq, but I want you guys to be able to see this, obviously. So let me try this one more time. I think what happened was I went to go and create a new substance. All you have to do is go to File, New Substance. I'm just calling this one Test, and then I'm going to bring it over and show you. Okay, come on. Oh my goodness. Sorry for the struggle. Eventually we'll get it. It is hating me right now. Feel free to skip forward. We're almost there. Okay, we're there. All right. That was painful. Okay, here we are. In Substance Designer. Apologies for the weird format. Again, my Cintiq is kind of messing things up a little bit as far as monitor size and stuff goes. So, for any of you that are familiar with Substance Designer, you might know where I'm going with this, but there's a pretty I press spacebar. There's a pretty recognizable node in Designer called Grunge Map 005, and what do you know? It looks very similar to some tree bark. We're not going to use this exactly, but we're going to use a variation of this. And I think creating height maps and tileable textures in Substance Designer merits its own YouTube video, instructional video. So maybe I'll do that in the future, but for now we're just going to keep things simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring out a levels node here, and I'm going to plug this guy in, and I'm going to, holy cow, I'm going to play with my sliders here. I want just I don't want so much definition like the original node, you know, these like kind of gray spots. All I really want are these main cracks, because that's pretty much how our tree looks. And I think, you know, as you can see when I'm playing with the levels node, I'm just sort of getting rid of as much of the gray values as I can and making my, maybe something like that. Gray, as most people know, height maps, black will represent the lowest point, whereas white will be the highest. So gray midtones are good, but if you have something that's so noisy like that, it's not really going to look good on our sculpt. I'm just going to say maybe there. Let's try that for now. Now what I want to do is I want to break that up a little bit, so I'm going to use a directional warp. And I'm going to use our levels node as our input. And we have this nice thing called intensity input down here. And so we want to kind of make it a little wavy, right? And I'm just comparing it to my reference here. So I think what might work really well would be a purlin noise. Let's try it. Let's use our purlin noise as an intensity input. And you can see pretty instantly that our height map gets pretty dang crazy. What I can do though is I can affect its intensity. I don't think we want it to be so much wavy as that is right now, but what I do want is, I think this noise by itself is way too noisy, and that's why we're seeing so many little squiggles. So what we might be able to do is we might be able to scale this up a little bit, and we can see how it's affecting. So if I double click my directional warp node and I single click my purlin noise, and we can see it affecting our output here. So I think something like that might be fine. That's not bad. So let's just try this. Let's try this as our output. Super fast, super easy. I probably would spend more time on this, but this video is already getting to be pretty lengthy, so let's just try this out. Let's save this as a bitmap. Let's go to our thing, and then let's call this, let's save it as a, I think Zbrush reads Photoshop files. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Let's find out. And then let's just call this bark height map. Let's save that. Let's minimize designer because we might need to come back, and then let's bring up Zbrush. Okay. So what we're gonna do now is I'm just gonna go back to my standard brush, BST for standard, and then I'm gonna import an alpha. So by clicking alpha, I'm gonna press import. Let's go to our PSD. It looks like it does read PSD. That's cool. So here we have our alpha, and what we can do now is we can change our stroke to drag rectangular, and you can see that if I just click and drag, it projects that height information onto our tree. Obviously, this is quite intense, and we don't want it that intense. And we don't even know if this is going to work for our situation, but let's just try it. So this is a pretty quick and easy way to overlay nice micro detail on top of our shape sculpt. So let's bring this intensity down, and then let's just kind of mess with it. So essentially I'm dragging this out and I'm seeing how this is looking. I'm comparing, and that's not bad. Maybe we do want to have a little bit more gray in there so we get some more definition in our micro detail. We also definitely want to I don't even remember what I was saying. Let's go back into designer, and let's affect our levels a little bit by single clicking, and then let's just bring in a little bit more of our grays, and let's try something like that. Just a little bit more definition. Yeah, let's try something like that. Let's save this. Let's just override our previous one. Let's save that. And then let's go back to Zbrush. Let's re-import. And then let's see how that looks. Yeah, I mean, that's not too bad. Okay. These are quite pronounced in most of the trees that I'm seeing. And I'm also noticing that they're only really pronounced up in this area. So we want to be really conscious of how we're projecting this detail on, and then we can go back and start to input our exaggeration bit into this. So let's start to drag these out in the direction that we see fit. I'm noticing this seam here. Let me just see if I can, because we're going to be smoothing out most of this stuff, but I just want to make sure that it's not going to be too disruptive. So let's try this for now. And then I'm just going to be mindful of the direction that these are going, and I'm also going to be mindful of the scale that these are going in on. So again, if you guys want to spend more time with this height map, that probably would be good. I just wanted to show you this method. It's generally worked for me in the past. I might bump up the intensity a smidge, because at the same time we don't want this to overpower our sculpt that we already did. So I'm trying to find that nice in between where I'm not losing this information that we already sculpted. And then I'm just going back in, seeing how this could work. So this looks like it could work. And if you think that you're thinking, oh man, this looks awful, then that's totally understandable. And I would not be offended if you wanted to do it a different way. I just wanted to show this method to you guys because in most cases this would be the quickest way to get some of that micro detail in here. Another obviously good method would be to create your own tileable texture and project this onto it. but I'm afraid, or sorry, afraid is not the right word. I'm also keeping in mind that we need to control the direction in which these veins and cracks are going, right? So if I had a tile of texture, I would have to do a whole bunch of UV work to make sure that everything is going in its proper direction, and I tend to avoid that as much as I can. So either way, we're going to find a way. We're going to find a way to make this thing look good. That is our goal. Just being conscious, and I'm being aware of where I'm putting all this stuff. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not overpowering what we already sculpted. And this was another reason why I went a little crazy on the bottom here with the sculpt, and that was because, sorry, my daughter is awake now. I'm getting distracted. And that was because if I were to overlay stuff, it would be really it would be noticeable about how our base sculpt was, right? So anyways, I'm clicking and I'm dragging. I'm following the direction of my trunks here. I don't want to make this too noisy either. So I might fluctuate our intensity as we're dragging these things out. And as I'm looking at this, you guys, I think that this is way too noisy. And that's not matching our concept or our reference at all. So I'm gonna go back. I'm sorry if this is really annoying. I'll see if I can put some like time markers here. But I still want you guys to see like how I'm approaching this stuff and what I'm thinking. The reason why I got rid of all that was just because these were way too small. I'm looking at, so I'm just gonna press OK. I'm looking at my reference, and these cracks are actually quite large. I mean, maybe even to that degree. So, let's try that. You'll see here that when you get to an area where it can no longer project orthogonally onto that surface, it'll start to bleed over, and just be mindful of that stuff. So again, I'm trying to match. I'm trying to match my the concept, or I keep saying concept, my reference photo of this tree, and I'm trying to decide if this is going to work or not. I'm starting to think it might not work. Just because I get these areas where it starts to crisscross over. But again, I can kind of go in and start to erase some areas that aren't working, and it gives it a little bit more variety instead of this being this mishmash of random cracks and stuff. So, and I think between this and the color information, mixing those two together, it'll help us to not notice stuff like that so much. So by erase, all I'm doing is I'm just smoothing it out, because this is height information that we're projecting onto this. So, you know, obviously these seams that we get, I don't think you get these seams if it's a if you have a certain file type. I'm not sure though. Every time I've done this method, I always get seams, and I have to like be aware of that. So, and we can go. I mean, the important thing is that we have this height information here now that we can work with, and once we start to mix our clay tube brush or whatever we decide to use, it should come out fairly good, because that's what we're shooting for, right? Fairly good. Okay. Again, I'm noticing that most of the cracks are up towards the top here. They're not so much on the bottom. It pretty much smooths out once it gets towards the bottom. And I'm just smoothing out cracks that don't really make sense to me or to the flow of the tree, and then I'm just kind of replacing them with a new version, and then smoothing out where these crisscross areas come into play. So, let me see. And I think I said at the beginning of the video that my sculpting process, it's very experimental. This was just kind of the first idea I had. Maybe later we decide that this was a terrible idea and we should never do this again. That is part of the process, you guys. If it looks bad, I'm going to try and work with it, and I'm just going to try to fix it. Because I'm always getting into these situations where I just spin my wheels, trying to find solutions to problems that I could have solved, 3 weeks ago if I had just worked with it. So, this again might be a little too noisy. We might even want these cracks to be larger, but I think this is okay for now. It's getting there. So, okay. I think we can work with this, you guys. I accidentally pressed X, and that's why there's a second. That's Symmetry Mode. So, and you can do this with, again, you can do this with any height map. It's kind of, I think this is a really cool way to work, and you project height information onto your mesh. Again, you just got to be mindful that you're not erasing, you're not erasing the work that we've already done. So, and this would also probably be a good example of where we would use a morph target, because we could control the intensity of these cracks as opposed to controlling it through our Z intensity. But that's okay. That's okay. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Okay. I mean, yeah, so let's see if we can make this work. I'm afraid that when I bring out smaller cracks, it's going to be way too noisy. So, yeah, maybe that is the quote-unquote secret. Maybe it's just that we haven't been dragging out our height maps to be large enough. Because now that I'm seeing larger cracks, it's starting to look a little bit closer. I'm just going back and I'm cleaning it up. Let's try like another large one right here. That's kind of nice. Smoothing out this bottom. Okay. Okay. Not terrible. Not terrible. Yeah, so I'm starting to think that that was it. Maybe it was just I wasn't pulling the projection out to be large enough. Because now that I zoom back and I see it's a little noisy. What we can do, though, is we can erase some of the smaller cracks and then try to accentuate some of the larger ones. But up close, it's not too bad. So, okay. And some of these cracks, I'm noticing that some of them actually do travel up the base trunk. I really hate that I'm getting this horizontal line. I don't like that at all. I guess one way to get rid of that would be to take this into Photoshop and then circle select, or feather select, sorry, and then delete so that you have a nice gradual fall off. You know what? Let's do that because it's getting to the point where the further we go up the tree trunk, the more that line is becoming noticeable. So let's I'm gonna open up Photoshop really quick, and it looks like I already had it open. Did I? Where's it at? Oh yeah, I have it open for my reference board. So what I was talking about was, let's see if this works. Let's select our height map. Yeah, let's select our height map here, and then let's do like a elliptical, and then let's set our feather to be around like 60. And then let's just select somewhere, sorry. Let's select maybe like the bottom corner here and hold shift to get a nice, I'm trying to center it as much as I can, and I don't use Photoshop a lot, so there's probably a better way to do this, but something like that. And then let's select the inverse, and then let's delete. So I'm thinking that might work. I still don't know if it would detect the edge of my alpha though. I don't know, let's try it. Let's save it as a duplicate just in case. And then let's go back to Zbrush, and then let's import it. PSD and then bark map 2. Oh my goodness, what happened? Yikes. That looks good, huh? So clearly something went wrong there. Huh. What did I do wrong? Maybe let's try saving it as a different file type. Let's try let's try PNG. And then let's there we go. Yeah, because the PNG should read. Okay, yeah, but we still have that stupid edge. But I'm thinking maybe if we didn't make that selection or that delete so drastic, so maybe something like that. Maybe just one delete. Let's try this one. And then let's go back. Let's re-import. We might need to deal with it. Sorry if I'm being stupid and there's an easy way to get rid of it, but holy cow, it's so noticeable. I'm trying to think, how could we get past that? I guess we could turn the intensity down, but that, I might be stumped, you guys. Maybe for now, we have our intensity to be very low, maybe like 5. And we kind of just go back and we erase out any of these other areas here. So just giving it a little bit of definition. That might be okay. And again, when we get our actual bark texture and we start to color this thing, I don't think those seams will be too big of an issue. Yeah. I mean, this could work. And I'm also, again, also the edges on the taller pieces of the trunk isn't going to be a big deal just because it's projecting onto nothing, if that makes sense. But I am making sure that it's running the same direction that or the correct direction, I mean, if that makes sense. So it wouldn't make sense for me to like drag it out and then they have these horizontal lines, you know what I mean? So, okay, I'm going to turn this alpha off by clicking alpha and clicking off, and then I'm gonna see what I can do with this. I'm just noticing that from far away it looks quite noisy, so I'm just gonna go in and start to clean up these areas where it's too noisy. Just by smoothing it. So, but you can see now that we kind of have that, we're starting to get that like wavy crack pattern look, and once we start to smooth these things out, it becomes a nice little overlay onto our original sculpt. So, again, you guys, this is a process. I do this a lot, but I will do hours and hours and hours of just seeing what works and what doesn't work. You guys might not have that luxury. In fact, at most game studios, you wouldn't have that luxury, or at least most AAA studios. But I'm talking about purely personal work and, portfolio stuff. I try my best to see what yields the best result. This was the idea that I originally thought of, and I have this mentality, I think I explained it to you like maybe 6 or 7 times, that I'm gonna try and make it work. And this is gonna look a lot better when we get our leaves on there and our um, our trunk color gradients and stuff. And not saying that it looks bad now. I'm just saying, like, I probably would have spent more time on trying to develop a better method of how to get these wavy cracks in there, and this was the fastest way that I could think of that would be appropriate for a tutorial. So I think it's okay. I think it's gonna work, and we will work with it, right? I'm actually going to find my alpha map again and just kind of drag a slightly larger one out right there to fill up that space, and then find these stupid seams. If you guys, I mean, like, I'm gonna research it, but if you guys have a way of getting these seams to not show up, that would be super cool if you could tell me about it, because that's really annoying and I hate that. Okay. But again, I think, once we have the color information in here, those seams will be pretty much invisible. So, and I'm going in and I'm smoothing out areas to make this a better transition piece, so that we don't notice that this is just a repeatable projected texture that we used on our mesh. And I think it's going to work out just fine. So I'm just kind of zooming out and seeing, like, okay, yeah, this area is pretty noisy. Where can I tone that down? So okay. And then I think I might revisit my alpha a little bit, and I might just bring it up a tad on these up here, because I want this transition to be like, I don't want these to be just smooth, tall trunks. It wouldn't look right. It needs like a nice gradient of really high definition down here, and then it kind of gradients out to smaller definition up here, because our cards will be hanging down and mask that transition, if that makes sense. So I'm just going back and making sure that, and I'm also, again, keeping in mind that I don't want to get rid of our original sculpt. So there might even be areas in here where you could go back with your clay tubes or whatever you want to use, to, clean some of this stuff up with. So, but for the most part, I think that this is going to work for us. And we are nearly finished with our high poly. And just remember to keep in mind that this isn't the end all be all, right? We're going to be texturing this thing, and we're going to be adding cards, and the cards are really what we want to draw the most attention to, because we're gonna get a nice gradient on them. We're gonna lay them out. The main grounding of this asset obviously is going to be this trunk, and I think that we have enough detail here to mix with an amount of color information, being the texture. So I think, you guys, I think that's going to be it, at least for now, for our high poly sculpt. Feel free to get this to the level that you seem to think is the best, or however much time you have, obviously. I just wanted to try something really quick. Yeah, this is the pinch brush. I was just gonna see if I can maybe go back in here and kind of like accentuate these a little bit more. But I think it's good for now. We might come back to it later, but again, I think the main part of this asset is going to be the cards, the leaf cards, and our trunk is not looking bad. We'll keep working on it, but hopefully you guys got something out of this. But you know, I think we know enough to get the result we need, and just kind of playing off those tactics, right? Like getting our base shapes in here through our clay tube sculpt, smoothing it out, getting these nice peaks and valleys, and then overlaying our micro normal information with our cracks and stuff on top of that. And we'll see how this looks with our color information. But for now, let's move on to sculpting out our leaf cards, and I will see you guys in the next video.